Everyone told me I was too old. Too old for the heat, too old for the healthcare risk. Too old to start over on a Thai island at 74 with a suitcase and a pension and 4 years of widowhood behind me. I'd like a word with all of them. I'm George, 78 years old, Newcastle upon Tyne. I'll tell you straight off that I'm the oldest man you're likely to hear on a channel like this, and I know that because I've watched some of the others, and they're all in their 50s and 60s, which to me sounds like the middle of things rather than the end, which I suppose is relative. I'm not here to tell you about retirement planning or exchange rates per se, though I'll give you the numbers because you'll want them. I'm here to tell you that 74 is not too old. I know this because I was told repeatedly that it was, and I went anyway, and I've been here 4 years, and they were wrong, and I'd like that on record. I was a ship's engineer. Started at 17 on the Merchant Navy, North Sea and North Atlantic initially. Longer routes as I got my tickets and my experience. 22 years at sea on various vessels, doing various things that mostly come down to keeping the engine running and the ship moving, and arriving where you were supposed to arrive when you were supposed to arrive. Which sounds simple and is not. Then I came ashore. Margaret's request, which was reasonable given that we had 2 children and she was raising them largely alone while I was at sea, and the arrangement had run its useful life. I went into harbour authority work in Tynemouth, eventually became harbour master, which is a job with more paperwork than romance, but which kept me close enough to the water that I didn't feel entirely landlocked. Retired from that at 68, 10 years ago. Margaret died 2 years after I retired. Pancreatic cancer. She was diagnosed in April and she died in September, and I am not going to dwell on those 5 months except to say that she was a braver person than me and always had been, and the 5 months confirmed it. We'd been married 41 years. She was from Gateshead, and she had opinions about everything, and she was usually right, and the house in Newcastle without her opinions in it was very quiet in a way that I found, in the years that followed, progressively harder rather than easier. 2 years became 4 years, became 6 years. Janet came from Edinburgh when she could. Paul rang from Sydney every fortnight. He'd emigrated 20 years earlier and had his life there, and I wouldn't have had him upended for my sake. Friends from the harbour authority came round. Old shipmates occasionally. The church that Margaret had always attended, and that I'd attended with her, less by conviction than by the understanding that marriage involves some things you do because the person you married values them, and I valued her, so I went. I continued going after she died, partly out of habit, and partly because the community of it was something I found, to my mild surprise, genuinely sustaining. But 6 years alone in Newcastle, in a house built for 2, is a long time, and I knew by year 5 that something needed to change. The question was what, and where, and whether, at 73, going on 74, the answer was still mine to determine. My son Paul had been in Thailand several times on business, and had been to Koh Samui once on holiday with his family. He'd mentioned it in passing. Good weather, beautiful sea, well-developed infrastructure by Thai standards, a proper international hospital on the island. He didn't suggest I go. He's too careful a person for that. But he provided the information in the way that a careful person does when they want you to have it and intend to leave the decision to you. Janet's reaction to the idea was predictable, and I don't blame her for it. She's my daughter, and she loves me, and she is the kind of person who manages risk carefully, which she gets from me, and the risk calculus of a 74-year-old man moving to a Thai island alone was not one that she could run and arrive at a favourable result. She said, "What about your health?" I said, "What about it?" She said, "What if something happens?" I said, "Something will happen at some point, and I would rather be on a Thai island in the sun when it does than in a house in Newcastle in the January rain." She said, "That's not a responsible attitude." I said, "At 74, I've discharged my responsibility to responsible attitudes, and I'd like to try something else." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You sound like Mum." I said, "Yes, I know." That was the end of that conversation. I visited Koh Samui in October. Alone, Janet offered to come, and I said no thank you, because I needed to assess it the way I would have assessed anything throughout my career, which is personally and directly, and without someone managing my experience of it. Koh Samui is an island in the Gulf of Thailand, in the southern part of the country. About 250 square kilometres. About 60,000 permanent residents, more when the tourist season is full. It has a reputation as a resort island which is accurate and which coexists with a genuine Thai community that the tourist side sits alongside rather than replacing. There are proper Thai neighbourhoods and proper Thai markets and temples and schools and hospitals and the daily life of a Thai island that most visitors don't see because they're at the pool. The sea is what I came for. I want to say that plainly because for a man who spent 22 years at sea, it would be dishonest to pretend the sea wasn't the primary draw. The Gulf of Thailand has a particular quality of water that I noticed on the first morning I walked down to the beach near where I was staying. The colour of it, the temperature of it, the specific light on it in the early morning when the sun is still low and the water moves in a way that I recognised from years of watching water move and that I found immediately, unreasonably, like coming home. I swam on the second morning. The water was 28 degrees. I hadn't swum in the sea since before Margaret died. I floated on my back in 28-degree water in the Gulf of Thailand and looked at the sky and thought, well, George, here you are. I stayed for 3 weeks. I looked at accommodation. I met some of the expat community, which on Koh Samui is a mix of nationalities and ages and situations. I found an older contingent, men and women in their late 60s and 70s who had been on the island for years and who were the right people to ask the honest questions to. Whether the healthcare was trustworthy, whether the rainy season was manageable, whether at my age, alone, I would be isolated, or whether the island had the right kind of community. The answers to all of these questions were acceptable. Bangkok Hospital Samui is modern and well-staffed, and I visited it and walked through it and spoke to people there and was satisfied. The rainy season brings heavy rain, and some days of significant weather, but is not, by the account of people who have been through multiple of them, unmanageable. The community for older expats is real and warm and not exclusively organised around bars, which was my concern and which proved unfounded. I went home, told Janet I was going, withstood the full expression of her concern, which was considerable and which I listened to carefully, because she is sensible and because some of what she said required addressing, and moved to Koh Samui in the March of my 74th year. The house, not an apartment, I wanted a house, I've lived in houses for 50 years and flats feel wrong to me, is a small Thai house in a residential area on the north of the island, away from the main tourist beaches. 2 bedrooms, a living area, a kitchen with a gas hob that took me a fortnight to learn the idiosyncrasies of, and a veranda at the front that faces the lane and the garden and catches the morning light from approximately 6:15 onwards. A coconut palm in the garden that produces coconuts with an enthusiasm I have mixed feelings about. They are excellent, and they are also heavy, and they fall without warning. 22,000 baht a month. £500. Numbers, rent, £500. Utilities about £45. Food, I eat simply. The market 3 times a week, cooking most of my own meals, a proper Thai restaurant, once or twice a week, about £110. Health insurance, and at 78 this is the most significant cost and I want to be transparent about it, £280 a month. This is higher than the other stories you'll hear on this channel, because I'm 78 and the premium reflects that, and I don't begrudge it, because the alternative is being here without cover, and that's not something I'm willing to contemplate. Transport, I have a small automatic scooter that I will not be argued with about. I've been driving powered vehicles of various sizes and complexities since I was 17, and a small automatic scooter in reasonable traffic is well within my competence, about £25. Everything else about £70. Total, £1,030 a month. My pension, the Harbour Authority pension, and the state pension combined, is £1,380 a month. I have £350 left every month. I am 78 years old and retired and self-sufficient and living on a Thai island and generating a small surplus. Janet's risk calculation didn't account for the fact that my costs here are substantially lower than my costs in Newcastle were, which when I pointed this out to her, she acknowledged was a fair point. Now, the mornings. Because the mornings are the thing. I'm up at 5. This is not Thailand adjusting my schedule. I've been up at 5 my entire adult life. Because ships don't run on a 9 to 5, and harbour authorities don't either, and your body eventually stops pretending it's optional. Coffee first, strong on the veranda. The lane outside is quiet at 5 but not silent. The birds on Koh Samui are various and opinionated, and the roosters in the neighbourhood have a relationship with the concept of dawn that involves considerable personal latitude about when it starts. By 6 I'm walking to the beach. 15 minutes on foot through the residential streets, past the small temple where the monks are doing their morning rounds at that hour, past the woman who has a coffee and food cart set up outside the temple by 6 every morning, and who has been set up outside that temple at 6 every morning for 20 years, by her own account, and who calls me Lung George. Lung means uncle in Thai. An honorific for older men, and from whom I buy a coffee that costs 15 baht, and that is better than any coffee I drank in Newcastle. The beach at 6:15. The water. I swim for 30 minutes every morning without exception, which is the sentence that surprises people most when I tell them about my life here. 78 years old, 30 minutes in the Gulf of Thailand every morning. I'm not a fast swimmer. I never was, but I'm a competent one, and the water is warm, and the mornings are the best time before the day builds, and I have not missed a morning in 4 years except for 3 days when I had a chest infection in my second year, and Janet was on a plane from Edinburgh before I'd finished, explaining that it wasn't necessary, which tells you something about Janet. The fisherman. I want to tell you about the fishermen because they are the community I didn't expect to find, and that has become quietly the thing I'm most grateful for. On my stretch of beach there are 4 fishing families who have been fishing the same water for generations. They go out before dawn in small boats, and they're back by mid-morning depending on what the water gives them, and they deal with the catch on the beach itself, and they know the water the way I know a harbour, which is to say as something alive and various and requiring constant attention. I was introduced to them in my second month by a neighbour who understood that a former ship's engineer and a community of fishermen had things to say to each other. His name is Somchai, and he is the eldest of the group, 71, and he speaks the English that comes from 40 years of dealing with tourism on a Thai island, which is functional and direct and suited to the conversations we have. We talk about the water, about the wind and what it means for the following day, about the fish, which vary with the season and the weather in patterns that Somchai carries in his head the way I used to carry tide tables. About engines, 2 of the boats have outboard engines that require periodic attention and that I help with when I can, because 40 years in marine engineering means I know what I'm looking at, and Somchai knows I know, which established a basis for the friendship that neither of us has needed to discuss. I sit with them most mornings after my swim while they deal with the catch. I don't help with the fish. I know my limits and fish preparation is not a skill I have, but I drink coffee from a flask that Somchai's wife provides, and I watch, and occasionally I am consulted on something, and occasionally I consult them on something, and the silence between the consultations is the comfortable silence of men who have spent their lives working near water, and don't need to fill every moment with words. I have been called Lung George on this beach for 4 years. Somchai's youngest son, who is 17 and who wants to be an engineer, comes to me on Saturday mornings with questions that I answer to the best of my ability and supplemented by the internet when my ability runs out. His name is Chai, and he is going to be good at whatever he turns his attention to, and I've told him so, and he received this with the slightly embarrassed pleasure of a 17-year-old being told something by an adult that he suspected was true and is glad to have confirmed. Admiral arrived in my 3rd month. A cat, grey, large, bearing the expression of an animal that has assessed its options and made a decision rather than stumbled into a situation. He came through the garden gate on a Wednesday evening, ate the fish I'd been cooking with a decisiveness that suggested this had been planned rather than improvised, and went to sleep on the veranda chair. I made no particular move to encourage or discourage this. By Thursday morning he was still there. By Friday I'd bought cat food. By the end of the week we had an arrangement that has been in operation ever since, and that I've stopped describing as temporary. I called him Admiral, because it seemed appropriate. He has not lived up to the name in terms of deference or professional respect, but he is consistent company, and he meets me at the gate when I come back from the beach in the mornings, and that is a thing I did not know I needed until I had it. Janet visited in November of my 1st year. She came with the energy of someone expecting to find a situation that required managing, and found instead a situation that was, and I could see her recalibrating in real time. Fine, more than fine. She met Somchai, who was formal and courteous, and offered her coffee from the flask, which she accepted. She walked the beach with me on the morning of her 2nd day and swam, which she hadn't planned to do, and which the water persuaded her into. She ate dinner with me at a Thai restaurant I'd been going to since the 1st month, where the owner, a woman called Kun Dao, knows my order and brings it without asking. On the last evening, Janet sat on the veranda and was quiet for a while. Admiral was in her lap, which he'd decided unilaterally was acceptable. Then she said, "Dad, I was wrong." I said, "About what?" She said, "About this." She said, "I thought you were too old, and I thought it was a bad idea, and I thought you'd struggle, and I was wrong about all of it." I said, "I know." She said, "That's very irritating." I said, "I know that too." She laughed. I laughed. Admiral declined to find anything funny and fell asleep. I spoke to Margaret that night. I do this periodically, not because I believe she can hear me, though I hold my uncertainty about that carefully rather than decisively, but because 41 years of talking to someone leaves you with the habit of talking to them, and the habit is not, I've decided, something I need to give up. I told her about Somchai and Chai's engineering questions, and Admiral and Kun Dao, and the morning swim, and the water at 28 degrees, and the light on it at 6:15. I told her Janet had come, and that she'd said I was right and Janet was wrong, which Margaret would have found satisfying, because Margaret was always right, and she understood the pleasure of being right, and she would have wanted me to experience it at least once in her absence. I'm 78 years old. My knees are not what they were, and my back makes its opinion of the humidity known periodically, and there are mornings when the swim takes more out of me than it used to, and I rest afterwards longer than I used to. I am not going to pretend otherwise, because I am nearly 80, and the body is keeping its own accounts, regardless of what I'd prefer. But I swam this morning. 30 minutes in the Gulf of Thailand at 6:15, with the sun still low and the water the colour it is, and Somchai on the beach with his coffee when I came out. Admiral was at the gate when I got back. Lung George from the woman with the cart at the temple. Strong coffee in the morning on the veranda, and the coconut palm doing what it does, and the lane outside coming to life. Paul rang last Sunday. He asked how I was. I told him about Chai's latest engineering question, which was about propeller pitch and why it matters, which is something I know rather well, having spent 22 years in proximity to marine propellers. Paul listened and then said, "Dad, I'm glad you went." I said, "So am I, son, so am I. The ones who said I was too old. I bear them no ill will. They meant well and they knew the general case, even if they'd misjudged the specific one. The general case is that 74 is old to start something new in a foreign country, and the risks are real and should be assessed honestly. I assessed them honestly. I went anyway. Here is what I found. The sea, which was always going to be there. Chai and his families, and their water and their boats. Chai asking questions on Saturday mornings. Lung George at the temple cart. Kun Dao knowing my order. Admiral at the gate. Margaret would say, "Stop counting and start living." 41 years to fully understand that advice. I'm following it now. And this morning, which was mine, which was warm, which was another one.